They say your wedding day is the happiest day of your life. They don't mention the sound a champagne glass makes when it hits marble. They don't warn you how cold betrayal feels in a room lit by fairy lights and filled with people who just watched you say, "I do." I remember the clink of forks against crystal, the hush that fell over the reception tent as Erin stood, clutching her wine glass like a sword. My best friend, maid of honor, secret keeper, sister in everything but blood, smiling that familiar smirk I'd once trusted with my life. "I just want to say how happy I am for you both," she began, voice syrupy sweet. "Danny and I go way back, don't we?" She looked at him, not me. "There's a history there. But hey, don't worry, Liv. All in the past." Nervous laughter rippled through the room. I forced a smile. My fingers found the stem of my glass, gripping it like an anchor. Daniel shifted in his chair but said nothing. "Remember that weekend we got snowed in at the cabin?" Erin went on, letting the silence fill in the blanks. No signal, no distractions, just firelight and, well, anyway, that's when I knew Danny had a special talent for keeping secrets. She winked. "But I suppose we all do, don't we?" Something inside me began to detach, like a rope snapping in slow motion. My heart thudded loudly against the lace of my bodice. I searched Daniel's face. His jaw was tight, eyes unreadable. He didn't deny it. Not even with a glance. Then Erin lifted her glass. "I guess I'll miss our secret weekends in the cabin, Danny. But hey, cheers to honesty, right?" A stunned silence. Someone laughed awkwardly. A plate clattered in the distance. I felt my body move before my brain did, my hand loosening, the glass falling, catching the candlelight as it shattered at my feet in a burst of gold and sorrow. Gasps. The smell of roses and champagne in the air. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Daniel didn't reach for me. He just muttered, "She's had too much to drink." Erin laughed quietly and sat down. My mother's voice called out, soft, concerned. But it was muffled, like I was underwater. I turned and walked, ran through the crowd. My heels stabbed into the grass, my veil catching on a low-hanging branch. I didn't care. I tore it free. My dress dragged behind me, stained with wine and dirt. A perfect metaphor for the pristine image I'd tried so hard to preserve. Outside, the night air slapped me. It smelled of pine, ocean salt, and the distant bonfire someone had lit too early. The stars above were cruel in their indifference. I stumbled toward the garden, away from the music, away from the eyes. I collapsed onto a wooden bench near the fountain where Daniel had proposed. I remembered the way he knelt, how his voice trembled when he asked if I wanted forever. I had said yes because I believed we were building something unshakable. Because I thought love, when spoken in front of friends and family, became real. Binding. But now Erin's words echoed again, cheers to honesty, and I felt my stomach churn. The sentence had been a scalpel, slicing through the performance, exposing the raw, ugly truth beneath the white. A mosquito buzzed near my ear. Somewhere inside, the music had resumed. People were laughing again, dancing, pretending they hadn't, witnessed the unraveling of a woman in real time. I stared at the ring on my finger, the diamond catching moonlight. Too bright, too hard. It looked like a promise, but it felt like a lie. I wanted to rip it off, but my fingers were swollen. It wouldn't budge. So I sat, hands shaking, letting the cold creep into my bones, letting the silence swallow me whole. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just listened to the water trickle from the fountain. The one Daniel said reminded him of Paris, the one he kissed me beside when he first said he loved me. I stared at that water until it blurred into silver streaks. My own reflection, warping with every ripple, and I whispered to no one, Why didn't I see it? It started, as most traps do, with something beautiful. 5 years ago, I stood at the edge of a ballroom in an ill-fitting thrifted dress, gripping a plastic flute of sparkling cider because I couldn't afford to drink on an empty stomach. I'd just given a speech. My first as the director of a grassroots literacy project I had built from scratch with nothing but a laptop, a pile of rejection letters, and too much hope. That's when Daniel approached me. Crisp suit, glass of red wine, a jawline like it had been carved by confidence. He told me I was eloquent. Said my words reminded him of Neruda. I laughed, blushed. He asked if I needed funding. No one offers money without strings, I'd said. I only tie bows, he replied. He had the kind of gaze that lingered just long enough to feel intimate, but never invasive. It felt like someone had finally turned toward me after years of speaking to empty rooms. He emailed me the next morning. By that weekend, we were having dinner. By the end of the month, he was calling my late-night poetry our little secret and slipping donation checks into the folds of napkins at cafes. I didn't see the shadow behind the generosity then. I only saw the light. Erin warned me early on. Of course she did. Something about him feels polished, she said once over drinks. Like he practices being charming in the mirror. You mean he's not a disaster like the guys I dated in college? I mean he's too smooth, too curated. She was always the cynical one. Sharp edges and sarcasm. I chalked it up to overprotectiveness. But now, looking back, I think she saw something I couldn't afford to admit. Daniel was wearing a mask, and I was falling for it because it fit the fantasy I'd been clinging to. See, I had just escaped years of scarcity. Hand-me-down furniture, landlord notices, working late shifts, and writing poems between table turns. Daniel offered relief. More than that, he offered validation. The kind I hadn't even realized I'd been starving for. Slowly, I let go of things. At first, it was subtle. My cluttered, sunlit apartment, with books stacked in every corner and the scent of lavender always in the air, was replaced by his sleek, cold condo where everything was gray, minimal, echoing. He said it was modern. I said it was sterile. He laughed, said I'd get used to it. Then my routines. I stopped writing at night because Daniel woke early. He'd ask me to come to bed, say, "The muse will still be there tomorrow." But she never was. She hates being silenced. Even my wardrobe changed. One day he brought home a tailored coat in beige cashmere, said I looked too bohemian for board meetings. I kept it, of course. It was beautiful. But I folded away my vintage velvet and worn denim. Each piece tucked into a box I promised to revisit. I thought I was becoming refined, professional, a grown woman. But I was just disappearing in increments. Erin pulled away slowly. At first, it was just fewer texts, then skipped brunches. I told myself she was jealous, or busy, or maybe just couldn't handle the new version of me, the one who drank imported wine and read the Financial Times instead of Rilke. She told me once that I seemed quieter. Like you're waiting for permission to speak, she said. I laughed it off. I'm just focused. Or silenced. We didn't speak again for 3 months after that. There were signs, of course. But they came disguised. Daniel liked to handle our money. He said I was too dreamy to worry about bills. At first, I was grateful. But eventually, I had to ask for my own debit card like a teenager. And when I asked where our savings were going, he'd smile and say, "You leave the numbers to me, honey. Stick to metaphors." He started calling my writing a hobby. Suggested I self-publish online to save face. Told me one of his clients said poetry was a bit feminine for a power couple. I remember standing in front of the mirror, holding the ring he gave me. Platinum, round cut, perfect on the outside, but it always pinched my skin. I convinced myself I'd grow into it. That it was my body's fault, not the rings. I even stopped eating bread for 2 months to shrink. My fingers. I told myself that was normal. That love meant compromise. That being chosen meant changing. But even back then, something in me knew. The warmth I felt wasn't sunlight. It was a heat lamp, artificial, controlled. And I was a flower bending toward it, forgetting what real light felt like. The last poem I wrote before we married was scrawled in a notebook I never showed him. It ended with the line, "I used to bloom in darkness. Now I wilt in gold." And I still said yes. I stood in front of friends and family, in a cathedral soaked in candlelight, and promised myself to a man who had slowly turned my voice into an echo. Erin sat in the front row. She clapped. She even hugged me after. But her eyes said, "You don't even see the cage, do you?" And I didn't. Not then. Not until the night her toast shattered it. The dress still smelled like smoke. Not fire, exactly. More like the bitter scent of candles burned too long. The fabric was stiff with dried champagne, and the hem was freckled with dirt and blood from when I'd run barefoot across the gravel path outside the reception hall. I don't even remember taking my heels off. I just remember needing to move, to get away from all those eyes and the echo of Erin's voice slicing the air. Cheers to honesty. God. That line. It looped in my head like a scratched record. I sat on the edge of the bathtub in the hotel suite Daniel had booked for our wedding night. What a joke that word became, and watched the mascara drip from my lashes, little black rivers carving paths down my face. I looked like a ghost bride, or a painting ruined by rain. The silence was thick, the kind that doesn't soothe. It suffocates. I stared at the wedding photo someone had propped up on the vanity. We were laughing in it, our foreheads touching. My smile looked real. His did too. I hated that. He came in around 2 a.m. I heard the key fumble, then the door creaked open. Daniel stumbled inside, reeking of whiskey and expensive cologne. Not the one I bought him for the wedding. A different scent. One I didn't recognize. That small detail felt like betrayal too, like even his smell had cheated on me. He saw me sitting there and had the gall to sigh. "She went too far," he muttered, kicking off his shoes. "But you always overreact. Overreact." Something in me snapped like a stretched wire. I stood slowly. My dress creaked as it shifted over my skin. "Tell me the truth," I said, voice shaking. "Don't lie to me again." Daniel rubbed his eyes, walked past me toward the minibar like this was just a bad Tuesday. It wasn't a big deal. Once, maybe twice. It meant nothing. My fists clenched. The words were cold. So casual. Like he'd just knocked over a glass of wine, not torn my life in half. "It meant nothing to you," I whispered. But to me, it was everything. He didn't even look at me. Just sipped his drink and said, "You're making this bigger than it is." I took off my heel, turned, and smashed the framed wedding photo against the tile wall. The glass shattered, just like I had. The days that followed were a fog. Time stopped behaving properly. Some hours stretched like rubber bands, others snapped past without warning. Daniel shut down. He wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't let me back into the condo alone. Claimed he needed space. I stayed in the hotel for 2 nights on my own dime. Then the cards started declining. That's when I found out he'd frozen our joint accounts. I had nothing. No savings in my name, no access to the car, the condo, the accounts. The sleek little life we'd built together. He held every key. My phone buzzed constantly. Messages from family, from old friends, all asking what had happened at the wedding. I ignored them all until Aaron texted. You knew what he was deep down. You just didn't want to see it. I stared at that message for a long time, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Not the way it should have. Not after what she did, because she wasn't wrong. Not really. I had known. In pieces. In fragments. In late-night moments when I'd rolled over in bed and found myself staring at the ceiling, wondering why I felt so alone in a room with the man I was supposed to love. But knowing in theory and hearing it out loud, hearing it confirmed by the man himself in a voice thick with apathy, that was different. My mother called the next day. Sweetheart, she said gently, you took vows. People make mistakes. It's not worth throwing everything away over one night. One night, I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat like glass. I packed what I could into a trash bag. Not a suitcase, just a black garbage bag full of underwear, a toothbrush, and the beige cashmere coat he once said made me look less chaotic. I wore it like armor as I stood outside my friend Lena's apartment, rain slicking my hair to my forehead. She took one look at me and didn't ask questions, just opened the door and pulled me inside. That night, I slept on her couch curled around the bag like it was a lifeline, and sometime around 3 a.m., I got up and walked to the mirror in her hallway. What I saw wasn't me, not the girl who used to write poems until dawn and argue about philosophy over cheap red wine, not the woman who once believed in her own fire. This version of me was dim, dull-eyed, draped in beige. But even in that shattered reflection, something stirred. Not anger. Not yet. That would come later. This was quieter, deeper. A pulse, a breath, a whisper that said, "You're not gone." Not yet. I woke up the next morning to Lena handing me a cup of coffee in one of her chipped mugs, the same mug I'd once spilled Pinot Noir into after a breakup back in college. A familiar object. A thread tying me to who I used to be. I wrapped my fingers around it and just held on. For the first time in years, no one was telling me to smile, to be softer, to forgive. I didn't know what came next. But I knew one thing. I was done being small. I didn't leave the city in a blaze of glory or a string of dramatic goodbyes. I didn't even tell Lena until I was already at the station, standing under the flickering fluorescent lights with a coffee too hot to drink and a heart too raw to stay. All I left behind was a note on her kitchen counter. I need to disappear for a while. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't. I bought a one-way bus ticket to a coastal town I'd once used in a poem. The kind of place where gulls cry above faded boardwalks and fog rolls in like old grief. I hadn't visited, but I remembered the name. It sounded like something from a lullaby. Elk Shore. The bus ride felt endless. My forehead rested against the cold glass as trees and towns blurred into each other. I held that trash bag in my lap like it was a shield, though by then it was half empty. I'd thrown out the beige coat somewhere along the way. I couldn't wear it anymore. It made my skin itch. When I arrived, the town was sleepy. Salt air sleepy. The kind of quiet that holds space, not silence. I wandered into a cafe near the bus stop, asked if anyone knew of a room for rent. A man with sunburnt cheeks pointed toward the library and said, "Ask June." June was a retired librarian with eyes like silver coins and a spine shaped by years of carrying too much knowledge and not enough rest. She lived alone in a weather-worn cottage just 2 blocks from the sea. When I knocked on her door, she studied me for exactly 3 seconds before saying, "You've been through something," and letting me in. She rented me her attic. It smelled like lavender and old paper. The bed creaked. The window faced the ocean. It was perfect. "I don't need references," June said as she handed me a cup of tea. "But I do ask that you leave the ghosts outside." I nodded. But the ghosts had followed me there. They sat in the corners of the room, whispering old memories. Aaron's laugh in my ear, Daniel's voice saying it meant nothing. The sound of the wedding photo breaking into pieces on the bathroom floor. I started volunteering at the town library. It was quiet work, sorting returns, dusting shelves, answering the same small handful of questions from the same small handful of people. No one asked who I was or why I was there. They just called me the Poet Girl, because June mentioned it once, and the name stuck. The library smelled of old stories and slow healing. I began journaling again. Just a line or two at first, then full pages. I wrote about the ocean, about the silence between two people in love, about shame that grows roots in your ribs. One night I found a box of my old poems in the bottom of the duffel. They were crumpled and worn, still scented faintly with the lavender oil I used to dab behind my ears when I felt brave. Reading them was like meeting a younger version of myself, one who still believed in the magic of words, who hadn't yet traded metaphors for management dinners or candles for cold, recessed lights. I held one of those pages to my chest and cried for an hour. June and I developed a quiet rhythm. Tea in the mornings, long silences in the afternoons. Sometimes she'd tell me stories about a man she almost married or the sister she lost to grief. She never pried, but sometimes she'd say things like, "We choose our cages, then we curse the bars." One night, as the wind howled outside and the house creaked like an old ship, she handed me a thin book of poetry. Inside the front cover, she'd written in ink, "You are not what they took. You are what you kept." Weeks passed like tides, rising and retreating. I started cooking again, just for myself, simple things. Garlic and butter on toast, rice, and lentils. I found joy in the little sizzles and the way spices curled into the air. I walked by the shore every morning. The wind peeled back the layers of me like paint from an old fence, carefully, persistently. My skin grew tan. My mind grew quieter. One evening, I curled up in the attic with my old notebook and finally called Professor Lillian Marks, my mentor, from college. I hadn't spoken to her since I got engaged. She picked up on the second ring. "Darling," she said with a voice like warm wool, "I've been waiting." I told her everything. Not all at once, but enough. She listened. Then she said only this: "You're not broken. You're awakening." That night I took off my wedding ring. It had become a strange kind of weight. One I forgot was there until it pressed against me in the cold. I placed it on the windowsill, right beside a dried shell I'd found on the beach. The ring was too tight anyway. I still dreamed about Aaron sometimes. In those dreams, we were back in college, sitting cross-legged, on the dorm room floor with cheap wine and playlists full of Heartbreak songs. I'd believed then that our friendship was sacred, that she knew my soul better than anyone. But in the quiet of Elk Shore, I began to see the truth. We weren't soulmates. We were mirrors, both reflecting back the parts we wanted to hide. She needed to feel adored. I needed to feel chosen. And in that mess of codependence, something darker bloomed. Her betrayal wasn't just about Daniel. It was about power, about needing to be the center, even if it meant slicing me open in front of 100 guests. And me? I let her too many times. I let everyone choose what I was worth. Until now. I wasn't healed. Not yet. But I had learned the taste of stillness. And in that stillness, I realized something profound. I hadn't lost everything. I had lost what I thought would save me. But what remained? My voice, my words, my spine slowly straightening under June's roof, was mine. Alone, I wasn't starting over. I was returning to myself. It started with a blank page, not metaphorically, just literally. A page in an old leather-bound notebook June had left on the attic steps, one rainy morning with a sticky note that said, "Write it, even if no one reads it." At first, the words came in gasps, single-line fragments, scattered memories, sentences that trailed off into margins like they were afraid of being seen. But eventually, I found rhythm, and then I found honesty. I didn't write about Daniel. Not directly. Instead, I wrote about a woman with a tight ring and a shrinking voice, about a man whose kindness was laced with control, and a friend whose smile hid a dagger. I changed names, cities, endings, but the truth was stitched into every paragraph. I posted the stories online under a pseudonym, just a first name, Marine. It was the name of a street I once lived on, before him, before them. Back when I ate ramen on the floor of my tiny studio and believed heartbreak was something romantic, not ruinous. I didn't expect anyone to read them, but they did. The first comment came 3 days after I posted my first story. "It's like you crawled into my skin and wrote from inside me." Then another. "I thought I was the only one who felt like this." And another. "Thank you for putting words to what I never could." I wasn't invisible anymore. Not erased. Seen. Felt. I cried after that. Not the kind of sobbing I'd done on bathroom floors or into borrowed pillows. It was quieter. Reverent. Like mourning a version of me I finally had the grace to let go. Of one evening, I came home to find June waiting in the kitchen. Tea kettle steaming and a manila envelope beside her mug. "From my nephew," she said simply. "He's a lawyer. Quiet, but wicked smart. I told him a little about your situation. He offered to look into it." I opened it slowly, like it might bite. Inside were printed emails, notes, and highlighted passages from marriage law. Underlined. In blue ink were phrases like coercive financial control and joint marital assets frozen without mutual consent. I read the lines over and over. They didn't scream, they whispered that I had not imagined it, that what had been taken from me wasn't just emotional, it was tangible, legal, measurable. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. Daniel had frozen our accounts 3 days after the wedding. I remembered that call to the bank, the polite, impersonal refusal. "I'm sorry, your name isn't on the account access." I'd let it go, convinced myself it was a clerical mistake. But now, reading June's nephew's notes, I saw it for what it was. Fraud. Financial abuse. It didn't hit me like a punch. It arrived more like sunrise, quiet, inevitable, illuminating everything that came before it. Fueled by clarity, I dove into research. I requested bank statements, dug through old emails, contacted the bank to formally request joint access records. They stalled. I pushed. Eventually, cracks formed. There were transfers I hadn't known about. Funds moved right before our wedding. Debts paid in my name I never signed for. Property that had been gifted to his name, but that I'd helped. Furnish, renovate, clean. I documented everything. Not with fire in my veins, but ice. A calm so sharp it could slice glass. June watched me with the stillness of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize the difference between revenge and resurrection. "You're not trying to burn it down," she said one night. "You're building something new." Then came the discovery I wasn't ready for. Buried in an old email account I hadn't used since my engagement, I found a thread forwarded accidentally by Aaron. I almost deleted it. The subject line was banal. Dinner itinerary. But something in me hesitated. I clicked. And there it was, months before the wedding. A conversation between Daniel and Aaron, coded, cruel, and unmistakably intimate. Her. She's so eager to be loved. It's almost tragic. Him. She thinks the ring makes her invincible. Her. Maybe it does, but only if she never takes it off. My hands shook, not from rage, from the strange, shivering clarity of seeing the truth spelled out, casual and cold, in Helvetica. Font. They had been laughing at me, before the vows, before the betrayal became public. My stomach turned, but I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I saved the emails, printed them, slid them into the envelope with the legal documents. Then I made a cup of tea, sat on the porch with June, and let the wind carry away whatever was left of the illusion I'd clung to for years. Weeks later, I got an email from a small publishing house that specialized in new voices, raw voices. They'd read my blog. They wanted to talk. When I sat across from the editor on a video call, she looked me in the eye and said, "Your writing is painful. Yes, but it's not bitter. It's transformative, and that's rare." We signed a contract a month later, not for a novel, for a collection of essays, fiction threaded with truth. She asked if I wanted to use my real name. I thought about it for a long time, then said, "No, I want a new one. Not to hide, but to begin." I chose Mara Avery. Mara, meaning bitter. Avery, meaning wisdom. Bitterness transformed into wisdom. A perfect rebirth. One night I opened a drawer and found the perfume I used to wear. The one Daniel said was a little too loud for dinners with clients. I'd stopped using it. It had felt like too much, like too me. I uncapped it. The scent hit me instantly. Orange blossom, sandalwood, salt. Memory and rebellion bottled together. I spritzed it on my wrists, let it sink into my skin, stood in the mirror and whispered, "She's still in here." Then I walked back to the attic and wrote another story. By now the ring had tarnished. The silver dulled, the tightness around my finger replaced by the ghost of pressure. I never wore it. I never threw it away. I kept it on the windowsill, beside that seashell. Not as a reminder of him, but of me, of the moment I realized I'd been shaped to fit something small, something closed. But I was no longer that shape. I was growing into someone expansive, someone real. The city didn't feel the same when I stepped off the train. It wasn't smaller or louder or even colder. It was just duller. As though the sharpness I once felt in every honk, every impatient footstep on wet pavement, had faded. Or maybe I had changed. I walked past the cafe where Daniel and I used to sit every Saturday. He always ordered for me. Almond milk latte, no sugar. I used to think that meant he knew me. Now I understood it meant he liked to speak over me. This time, I went inside alone. I ordered what I wanted, a double espresso with a shot of vanilla and full-fat milk. I watched the barista raise an eyebrow. I smiled. Let her. My lawyer's office was in a glass high-rise uptown, the kind of place that smelled like money and floor cleaner. I wore a navy blouse and slacks I'd thrifted in the coastal town. No makeup, hair in a braid. But I walked in like I owned the ground beneath me, because I finally understood. Appearance was just noise. Substance was the earthquake underneath. The first meeting was brutal. Daniel was there. Of course. He came in late, with that same entitled saunter, wearing the suit I'd helped pick out for our engagement party. His eyes skimmed me like I was a stain on his shirt. Next to him sat Erin. She looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I just stopped seeing her as towering. She wore too much perfume, mine, ironically, and a shade of lipstick I used to borrow. Her eyes didn't meet mine. Not until the lawyer handed over the evidence packet. The room fell into a tense hush as they flipped through the documents, emails, texts, financial statements, bank transfers I hadn't authorized, real estate listings, vacation bookings to Italy, the ones I was never invited to, then the emails, the ones with her name, the mocking lines, The betrayals hidden in plain sight. Aaron paled. Daniel shifted, in his seat. "I don't want revenge," I said, keeping my voice even. "I want what I gave up. Willingly, but blindly. What I didn't know was already being taken." Daniel scoffed. "You're unstable." My lawyer didn't even blink. She slid a folder across the table. Records of counseling I'd gone to, statements from June, from the library, even a note from the publishing house affirming my employment, my professionalism, my mental clarity. Facts don't tremble. People do. The mediation stretched over weeks. They tried to fight it, said I was fabricating, exaggerating. But the law, surprisingly, had room for the truth, if you walked in with your receipts. In the final session, Erin couldn't stop shaking her foot under the table. That's how I knew it was unraveling for her. Her mask was slipping as they bickered over percentages, ownership, image. I leaned in and said softly, just to her, "You wanted the last word." She flinched, "But you gave it to me." She didn't respond, but her silence told me everything. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. I didn't throw a party. I didn't post a single cryptic quote or buy champagne or get a tattoo. I signed the final page in quiet, steady ink. My share of the property was returned, the joint account unfrozen, my name legally restored, and I walked out of that courtroom not triumphant, but whole. By then, the toast had gone to print. It was never meant to be a bestseller. It was a small book, a personal book, a stitched-together journal of essays disguised as fiction, about love, loss, silence, and the hunger for something more. The dedication read, "To the girls who loved quietly. You're allowed to be loud now." I did my first reading at a corner bookstore downtown. They had wine in plastic cups and folding chairs that creaked when people shifted. I wore a linen dress I found in a consignment bin, one with tiny embroidered daisies that made me feel like spring. I stood behind a wooden podium with a crack down the middle and read the passage I almost cut a dozen times. The one about the night I sat on the hotel bathroom floor in my wedding dress, mascara bleeding down my face like war paint. My voice didn't shake. There was applause. But more than that, there was understanding. Nods, wet eyes, the kind of silence that holds you. Afterwards, a woman in the back came up to me, middle-aged, hands worn. She didn't say her name. She simply said, "I left after 20 years. Your story made me feel like I wasn't starting over, just finally starting." I hugged her. There are moments you realize you've become the person you needed. That was one of them. I keep the wedding ring in a velvet box. It sits on my bookshelf next to the toast and a photograph of the ocean. Not out of grief, not out of rage, but as a relic, a reminder. It doesn't fit anymore, not just physically, but metaphysically. My fingers have changed, grown stronger. My soul has too. Sometimes I open the box just to see it glint in the light, and I smile. Because it's not a wound anymore. It's proof of survival. I still write. Every day. Sometimes about love, sometimes about anger. But always from a place of truth. I've stopped waiting for closure from others. I give it to myself now. Because in the end, the last word wasn't his. It wasn't hers. It was mine. And I didn't whisper it. I wrote it, spoke it, lived it. The end.